You really want my advice, Magister? You have proven yourself, Legate. I understand I have been a little dismissive of you, but in this situation, your methods are more than called for. Things in Italia have not improved. The Huns and barbarians have not called our bluff, yet. Eventually they will find out that all of our troops are here, and they will overrun Rome like they so nearly did before. And this time there's no one like my father around to stop them. On the contrary, there's your boy. Hardly a boy anymore, and hardly worth mentioning. He will achieve nothing. I have to win this war for him. I've come to realize that. So that's where you come in. Tell me, do you think it is possible to cut the final head from this Hydra? Well, Magister, I see it this way. Back at home, it's our Christians fighting theirs. This arrangement is like the shield of Mars himself. He gives us a chance to strike a killing blow here, and we have to take it this time. Is it possible to defeat the Sassanids? Of course it is. How did we get here if it wasn't? Will the last leg be the most dangerous of all? Most certainly. And it must be you to take command, Magister, or you might as well forfeit the goodwill you've gained so far. I say we march out as soon as possible, and we don't stop until the tears of the last Shah of Persia fall on your feet. Legate, you counsel wise. If I can do this, it will be by the merit of your aid, and for no other reason. I suspect that is what Mars would enjoy most. Hello there and welcome back to Fields of Mars. In the previous episode we saw an invasion hitting Trapezoros and were able to bring it down using our garrison army. Then we moved out for an invasion of our own and raised an enemy settlement to deny them the assets that settlement might have contained. Over in the west we started feeling the pressure from the Alamans when they took down one of the three armies we had defending Octogeron, but we got some revenge when we counterattacked and took down two of their armies in a decisive battle. Now we're back in the east, where Septimus and Varus are going on an offensive even without necessarily waiting to get full strength in advance. We're trying to just hammer the Sassanids while they have any form of weakness to continue denying them territories, because we are getting pretty close to actually taking everything from them. There goes one more settlement. I just used a cheeky night attack to attack it without all the reinforcements who were standing around getting involved. I was lucky enough to get a liberate option here, and I will take that. Liberating is going to be much more useful than occupying for just storming through the rest of their settlements, since we don't have to wait around to try and gain control of things and control public order ourselves. So we can now think about attacking something right after this next turn once we've got our movement points back. Further north I noticed that Parthia, I think it is, are coming to attack Tosp, that little allied state I created out there just to buffer us against the eastern powers, but looks like they're not providing enough of a buffer because they've been sacked recently and they're probably going to fall if Parthia attacks it again. So I'm just going to chuck Costa in there to provide defences in case it does get attacked. Meanwhile, slightly further north still, we've got Balba with our force that defended Trapezoros recently, and I'm not going to do anything with these forces. I'm just going to sit there, make the army a bit bigger, and hope that the many stacks just off to the east don't all team up to attack us at once. We've also got attacks coming in from the south up through Arabia, and they could be pretty successful. There's a lot of easy stuff for them to attack down here. Paulus is responsible for preventing anything from actually falling. Going to be difficult though, because he's got a very wide area to defend and everywhere is super weak, so wherever he isn't, he's almost guaranteed to fail. Now over on the Alaman front, all of the Alamans are just coming together now to attack Vitulus, and we're going to have to take a retreat here. This is a very difficult battle. Luckily our retreat isn't so insane or anything. We get a retreat into just about our own territory and very far away from the army, so they can't chase after him. Does mean that our plan to get our army out of Octoduron and break the siege isn't going to work. It's back under siege now with 5 armies surrounding it, which I think is actually more than when I began the plan to try and save the settlement. So it's still not going very well with the Alamans. The Sassanids continuing their agent spam here, but luckily Septimus wasn't having any of it. He was able to kill one of the enemy agents coming to interfere with our plans. This is something that just happens pretty much throughout every turn, as I think I mentioned before, and now and again you get lucky and actually kill the agents doing it. Usually not though, and if you deploy your own agents, they get killed as well, much faster. A very nice deal came up when the Roman separatists decided they wanted to be our puppet state. This is a little faction that's been preventing us from having to fight the Garamantians in Egypt like we used to be doing. So that's been essential to progressing against the Sassanids, and now they want to be our puppet state. So that will actually cause them to be at war with the Sassanids as well, for whatever that's worth. So here's the Alaman siege situation. I noticed that the way they're set up means the army besieging us doesn't actually have reinforcement range with the other armies. We might be able to exploit that later. Still 4 armies in the background waiting in reserve, so about 9 armies around the place right now that we might have to deal with. Vitulus is just going to go sit in Lugdunum. There's really no hope to actually attack the armies from the west from his position because he'd have to fight 4 at once. We've got another army down to the south that could potentially come and help. But more importantly, we've got Eutropius. Eutropius was going to go and attack the Huns who were hanging around on our border, but right now they've moved away, and I decided at this point that they're probably not going to pose any more danger to us. They're not strong enough to stage any attacks, so we can ignore them for a bit and instead bring Eutropius over to the Alaman front, so we have a decent army there, and that might give us some hope for defeating the Alamans for good. Heretics! Endless heretics! For how much longer will they emerge from the dying forests? How many more times will they multiply upon death? Out there, in the wastes from which these barbarians crawl, there must be a throne for the devil himself. His legions are a mockery of life, fooled into praying to a false god, and bent on the destruction of those who have found salvation. The Lord watches us all, sees us endure this trial, and waits to pick and choose his most loyal servants. But is death the only mark of victory in this regard? Can there be a world where the forces of man alone render the Lord's will triumphant? That must be what the Creator would want of his children. But how? How can it be done? Lord, please, send me the means to crush your enemies. Time for Septimus and Varus to move on, and we're spoilt for choice. We can go in pretty much any direction and find more Sassanids. I'm going to go southwest to start with to get that squared away, and then we'll go for the crescent of Sassanids over towards the northeast. There was an army in our way. It didn't want to fight, and then it put itself in a position that just happened to be slightly peculiar. It was hard to attack, so I'm just going to ignore it and instead go down to attack this settlement on the coast. No problems here since there's no army inside, and while it has a gigantic garrison and walls, it's no match for our combined forces. We'll kill them. I'm pretty much going to take no losses whatsoever here. What I was looking for was another liberate. That would be perfect. Unfortunately, in this case, we are not going to get it. Now, the best option would probably be to raise it, because that takes just as long as occupying, and then we could just ignore the settlement from now on. But I am going to occupy it just because raising isn't Septimus's style. So we, in theory, have to control this province now and rebuild it and such and try and get the food supply stable. But what we can do is just not do all of those things, because even if it rebels and gets taken over by another faction, that doesn't even matter at this point. As long as it's not controlled by the Sassanids, that's all we need, and it's not part of the territory I intend to take and hold in this campaign, so we can just ignore anything bad that happens to it, as long as the Sassanids don't take it back. The Alamans move an army back from the frontline position there, so that's nice. Now only 4 stacks to contend with. It's probably no different since technically you can't use 5 stacks at once in a battle, but still a bit better. Now the Huns offer a peace treaty. This was very much needed. This will confirm Eutropius' mission to go and fight the Alamans is safe, because the Huns will now just go away for good, or at least for the duration of the peace treaty. I wondered if they would be my puppet state again so I could get them to go to war with people, but maybe not. And they also didn't want to fight with the Alamans. That's a shame, but we'll still get a regular peace treaty with them since they want it. That's going to help us out. Now Atropatane are coming at us with another attack, coming through the pass that Anicius the Younger is meant to be defending to prevent things like this from happening, but he's not there at the moment. You may remember there was a bout of smallpox and I actually fell back from the front line because I couldn't get replenishment near the front. So because of that, we are now going to take attacks such as this, and of course the enemy are only going to sack the settlement, and since that settlement gets sacked every 2 or 3 turns, that actually doesn't really do anything. We have some similar negligence from Costa. I actually moved him away from Tosp to avoid winter attrition, and the moment I did, the Parthians just avoided fighting Tosp altogether and came in to attack us. So that was annoying. Again, an attack we should have prevented with the forces we have in the area, but it didn't happen. Luckily, Nisibis again gets attacked constantly, so it doesn't really matter if it gets sacked again because it has minimal effect. So the attack coming up through Arabia is getting pretty close to actually doing something now. Paulus is out of position. I was off there in the west killing some rebels along with those Illyrian forces we have there. I was just checking to see if he could do a night attack against the enemy here to take them down. Unfortunately not. I was a bit worried that these 2 stacks could start doing some real damage back there. They could take multiple settlements if they wanted, including Meshan, which I do want to hold. So we're going to pop back in there with Septimus to make sure it can't fall. I'm even going to move Varys down to defend it as well. And that's just because I really don't care about holding that new frontline position, as I said, so there's no point having our forces there. We'll just go back to Meshan, see what happens, then from there we can head northeast to attack more Sassanid and still not lose too much distance or lose too much time on our journey of conquest. We can also get Anicius back into the game. He very quickly annihilates the Atropatene army, which was half dead. I think it had taken loads of attrition walking about in the mountains, so that was all fine. Now on the Alaman front, here's me kind of noticing that we can actually just attack the besieging army without getting the other 3 armies involved, so I can sally out and attack them here. A battle that's slightly in their favour, but there's no reason to do that on its own. We do have our second stack down at Mediolanum, so I wanted to bring them up. The problem here is that we're walking through the Alps while they're still frozen over, so we lose loads of men coming up through that route. And even worse, there's nowhere up here we can actually put our army to avoid any overturn attrition, and I also don't have enough movement points to build a fort, so that's a shame. We're going to be significantly weakened by this attack. At least we have broken the siege and made the enemy walk through attrition as well. I could fall back completely from Octoduron here, but I decided to stay there with our 2 armies to see what happened, and the enemy seemed to fall back, reducing their frontline force to just 2 stacks, so now it's 2 on 2. That's looking a little bit more favourable. Then, though, we see an agent sneaking around the mountains here and coming over to Anicius the Younger, and he's going to be in trouble as a result of this. Your food, master. What? Oh, no, I'm not hungry. Just leave it. As you wish, master. But if it pleases the master, I would ask that you try the wine, to ensure that it is to your standards. I thought we had already established my standards. Wait, you're not. What happened to the old slave? He was found to have symptoms of the pox, master. For your safety, the quartermaster asked me to serve you in his stead. Easterners and their poxes. Impossible to separate, it seems. Ah yes, you are very right, master. Now, the wine. Do not be so pushy. Give me that. I'll take a damned sip to the health of the man who knew how to keep quiet. Here comes Atropatane for another attack on our border settlements. There are 2 routes from Ecbatana over there into our territory, and Odysseus the Younger was standing on the other way in, so once again, this is the same one they can go through as before, so really we do need even more armies to completely shore up all of our borders because of gaps in the mountains. But, as I've said before, they can just keep attacking these settlements that we're not really using for anything and don't really have anything in them because they've been attacked so many times, and really it's fine. We just need to not lose the territory, and since they never take it and they always just go back home afterwards, the borders aren't changing, so we're still maintaining our integrity overall. We get a marriage deal with the Roman separatists there, drawing them in just a little bit further, since they are now not only our puppet state, but our leading families are interlinked. Their emperor is now married to, I think, the daughter of Aurelianus. Now, we've got a message here saying we need to do some replacements, and this is of course for Anicius the Younger, who just suffered a tiny bit of an attack. I'm going to replace him with another guy named Anicius, just for some sort of continuity. This Anicius is actually one of the younger sons of Septimus, who I haven't used before, and we're probably going to get rid of him soon enough because it's getting confusing enough already. So many messages to hack through, that's pretty much the same every turn, but here was an opportunity to show it. I needed to come and find what happened to Anicius the Younger. Proved to be a tiny bit difficult. We eventually track it down in one of the hidden bits of the menu. Someone tried to assassinate him. They were not completely successful. He was only wounded, so we are going to get him back, so then I can put him back in command of his forces. But at least we've still got someone called Anicius in the meantime. There's Anicius the Younger in the family tree, confirming he is alive and is just in the wounded state. He is, of course, the illegitimate son of Anicius the Elder, Anicius Posthumus, and Paulus is technically his legitimate heir, but I'm not sure that's going to do him much good at the moment. I can also now get a wife for Vitellius. He's influential enough to be allowed to try and marry someone, so that's nice for him. Maybe the family line will continue on that end of the tree. And we can also see Anicius Piso there, the second alive son of Septimus, third overall, who we're probably not going to use too much in this campaign. As I said, just because it's going to get confusing. There are lots of people in the upcoming generation of our family, so that's useful in case people die, but we don't need that many generals, and some of our Senate generals are actually pretty good right now, so we probably don't want to be spamming them all out. Now, Paulus, speaking of Senate generals, has his work made a lot easier for him because the enemy who were attacking up from the south just started walking off, so that's fine. We're going to now move out with Septimus and Verus once again then to start going northeast towards the enemy forces and the next regions we need to take. We're also going to eliminate that Atripatene army that came into our territory earlier. So that's easy enough, and the first little battle for our new Anicius. Hopefully the men haven't even noticed that their old Anicius has been replaced. They're on to their third one now, must be as confusing for them as anyone. Now up here at Tosp, the Parthians took it from whoever it was who was controlling it before, and I'm just going to cheekily pop in and just put whoever it was back in control to resume our little buffer there, so that was easy enough. Now I noticed that the Eastern Separatists, the Roman Separatists, sorry, are attacking the Garamantians. Before they weren't at war with them, so that's why they functioned as a barrier between our two empires, because both sides couldn't walk through the Separatist territory. But with them attacking the Garamantians and stacking that up on top of the Western Roman Empire's operations against them, it looks like Africa is now going to be secured. We've got more good news on the front line with the Alamans, because Eutropius the Younger is now in position to start pushing back the enemy's forces with his powerful army. There were only 2 armies left, as we said earlier, and they don't want to hang around to fight, so all of the Alamans are now pushed back out of our territory and into their own. The war's certainly not over by any means, because they could still come in for a 5-stack attack, but we've got a lot more stuff ready to defend. What they actually do is switch targets, probably the right choice from them. They switch over to the west and send loads of men to start attacking Lugdunum with only Vitellius inside, although we will be able to move our forces later on to hopefully prepare for a counterattack there and save him. But first we've got another one of these battles. The Sassanids managed to rustle up 4 more stacks to come and challenge Verus and Septimus, although Verus, as you can see, isn't actually here. Something has happened to Verus just before this attack happened, and there's no agent visible, so it may be one of the spy type agents that remain invisible to other players. But before we can find out what actually happened, we'll have to win this battle to get to the message. Yes, well, the Magister didn't send me, actually. I was going to head out into the colonies my good old uncle set up, but I arranged for the plans to change in the end. Plans are always changing, aren't they? So yes, the legions will make sure those northerners aren't a bother anymore. Only problem is, I heard that one of your compatriots out here is obsessed with the old church. I saw people like him back east, dead mostly. I do hope he isn't going to do anything stupid. He's probably fine otherwise. I met briefly with a few senators in Mediolanum, and they seemed to love him. Saying it right below a statue of Mercury, they were. Funny what the gods will let us get away with. Right men for the right time and all that, one supposes. So, do you know how to make forts, or shall I show you? As things got started, our priority was to get Septimus's army over to join Varus's army. That's going to prove to be a tiny bit difficult. Septimus is just as close to the enemy as he is to our own troops, and he has onagers that he'll need to move very slowly over to our side of the battlefield, which will restrict the speed at which he can form up. So here we are some time later. I got almost up to Varus's army, but still left a gap in between thanks to the slowness of our siege weapons, so the enemy will be able to exploit that. They also have formed up two of their armies into one big blob and are starting their attack. They were going pretty heavy on the one unit of spear cohort I had on the far left-hand side of the army, right up against the line, attacking it with onagers. My cavalry, who are currently too far away, are now swooping in to take out the onagers. They had to hold back because the enemy army wasn't advancing away from their onagers for a while. Now, they are going to come right through this huge gap in between our two armies. They're not going to exploit it too much because they're doing the AI's favourite tactic of attacking the edge of the unit on the edge of the formation. So all of our soft underbelly is going to be safe for now. There are those onagers we're still waiting to get into position, just slowing everything down. Septimus himself forced to go out and attack the enemy's flanking force, even though it's camels. Hopefully the sheer power of our Praetorian guards will be able to get rid of them. On the right flank of Varus's army, we're doing a similar thing with the acting commander, this unit of spear cohort, but they're in a little bit more trouble because there are so many ranged units out there. And you can see all the shots just landing all around us as we move. This is why usually in battles like this, I don't like to move units at all because they just get quickly killed. That unit probably has almost no health on all of its troops after that little bit of running. On the far left, again, things aren't looking good. Some enemy camels came in and just annihilated our spearmen, as we've seen them do so many times before. A very powerful unit, these camel cataphract style things. There's another unit here trying to attack our legionaries from the front, but we're being helped out by the enemy's javelineers, throwing inaccurately into the melee and probably killing some of their own camels. But after the demise of those spears, they are going to be rear attacked. With all of my cavalry, I'm doing a somewhat dangerous move, but I saw an opportunity to sweep aside a massive amount of the enemy's skirmishers and their horse skirmishers. Normally this would be suicidal because as long as a couple of units of skirmishers could still attack you, they would gradually just kill all of your cavalry. But because of that red line of death there, we can trap the enemy and get a lot of them to fight in melee and maybe make a cavalry attack against them possible. We also kill their general with this attack as well, so it's going pretty well overall. Now, while I'm microing that, I'm also occasionally switching back to the onagers to manually drop shots into the big blobs of infantry just to thin them out. We can get hundreds of kills using this method. Those shots we're seeing now actually fire at will. The manual shots only go off one lump at a time, and they do a lot of damage, and it's just going to make sure we win that frontline engagement. The enemy doesn't have much infantry, so if we just blow some of it up, we'll have an overwhelming infantry advantage. Plus, our cavalry attack was eventually very successful. We got all of their stuff into melee, so our legionary cav will hack through their crossbow cav and horse archers. Some of our lesser Persian scout cavalry will kill the enemy's foot skirmishers. That will be nice and easy. Here we are a tiny bit later. We've wiped out most of the foot skirmishers, just finishing off the cavalry now. That's going very well. One of our units unfortunately got caught here. We were fighting with some enemy cavalry, and then our unit got surrounded since the enemy brought some spearmen back from the main fight to join this. By the time I realised it was too late, and we can't retreat from that engagement. We would lose the whole unit if we tried to escape, so it's best to just try and fight it and hope the enemy all rout before your unit gets defeated. You can see the front line starting to look pretty clear now, barely anything left from the enemy, and they're having a terrible time. They didn't really have many high quality infantry units in this fight. They had lots of the generic spears who aren't going to do much fighting against the front of our testudos. So we are able to win the main part of the fight. That doesn't really get us all that far because so much of the enemy force are skirmishers and our legionaries are very bad against skirmishers, so we just have to do nothing at this stage. We also need to deal with the never-ending supply of reinforcements that are going to come onto the field. Since they have 4 stacks, there's now going to be a big column of troops coming in to fight. Much easier than fighting them properly formed up, but still annoying, and they're doing some damage here on our right flank against Septimus's army, where I'm trying to pull the army back to make a more coherent line, but lots of units keep getting caught out in the open because they're being rapidly attacked by cavalry. These spears barely turning around in time to receive a cataphract charge, still losing half their men to it. The same thing happened to these legionaries already. They managed to destroy a lot of the enemy's cataphracts and they were finished off by skirmish attacks. Wasn't enough though, here comes another unit. Fortunately, they only hit 1 or 2 guys with this charge because our unit was split up by the previous fight in such a way that all of its men were on the edges of the unit, but the centre of mass was still in the middle, so the cataphracts tried to hit that centre of mass thanks to how the AI targets things, and missed everything. So that was very fortunate, but we're still going to lose all of those legionaries in the ensuing fight. Back on the other side of the battlefield, most of my cav, having done their job, are now getting back behind our lines to rest. Many of them were lost in the process of achieving their victory, but it was significant. It took out a massive portion of the enemy's army, so I was very pleased with how it went overall. This one unit getting caught by the superior speed of the enemy's light cavalry, they'll have to fight it out, and our scout cav are going to the back of the map, in theory to destroy the enemy's onagers as they came into the field, but they didn't really do anything. They just sat at the back of the map, so I ignored them. The last really risky part of the battle was getting everyone back behind our front lines. After we cleared things up out in the open, we did manage to avoid the remainder of their cataphracts. That means they'll now be forced to attack the front line. The Testudos with their bonus versus cavalry and the enemy being exhausted means that in combination not much is going to happen from those attacks. They do make one more attack on the left end of our line, just lighter cavalry this time, so nothing too bad for these legionaries. They already fought off all the camel cataphracts, so this will seem easier in comparison at least. We're even going to support them with our commanding unit of spears, just making a nice rear attack on those cav, and we can drive them off pretty easily. With them leaving the field, all of the enemy's melee capacity, but for a couple of units here and there, has been eliminated. They've got a few units of cataphracts left who are going to still try and charge the front line, not going to do much, and all of our onagers are now going to try and slam down all of the remaining horse archers. They've got a number of horse archers and crossbow calves just sitting out there in a blob, many of them actually not firing at us because they kept coming up to us and then skirmishing back and getting stuck in a loop doing that for whatever reason. So killing them with the onagers will gradually wipe them out. They're trying to make these attacks here on the front line, as you can see, not going to do much. Their men were too exhausted and they don't have enough troops to really break through, so we'll just kill those cataphracts nice and easy. And after a while, we see a lot of the enemy skirmish cav start to retreat. They've taken a lot of damage from our onager attacks, and this last unit still defiantly just skirmishing up and down, being annoying, being hard to hit at least from our onagers, is now going to get wiped out. We just hit them with a massive volley of explosives. It slightly misses thanks to the fact the enemy were skirmishing about, but it kills enough of them to get rid of them, and that's going to bring the fight to an end. A decisive victory. This battle seemed to be easier than similar battles like this we fought before. It seems that things just went well in general, and we killed the first army sufficiently quickly that we were only ever facing a column of reinforcements, so that was quite nice, and we'll see what comes of this and what became of Varus in the next episode. Eutropius the Younger arrived on the battlefront with no particular commission or mandate to lead the local Roman forces, yet he acted so confidently as if he had one that he instantly became the de facto Magister Militum in Italia. Being the much advertised heir to the real but too distant Magister, and being as it was that the concept of the position being hereditary was gaining ground, it was easy for him to assume huge amounts of power without opposition. The hard part would be the actual work of winning the war. It was a challenge more strenuous than the one his father faced. The Sassanids were in their death throes, and their long-oppressed puppets did less and less to save them from the ever-advancing line of broad red shields. That is it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks as always to all of the Officially Devin patrons. We'll march out to try and save Vitulus and to destroy the Sassanids in the next episode of Fields of Mars.